I used to babysit my younger brother a lot while growing up. I was 5 years older, so by the time I was 13 or 14, my parents were okay with me watching over him while they would go out. They would never leave us alone for too long, though, never more than just a few hours at a time. This happened when my parents went to a work party together one night on the weekend. They left at 5 and told me they would be back before 9. They left us food in the fridge and told me to watch my brother and call if I needed anything. To me, watching my brother actually meant just making sure nothing happens to him or that he doesn't leave. I never actually sat there and watched over him and whatever he was doing. I'd help him turn on his favorite show and then go do whatever I wanted to do in the other room. Sometimes I would hang out with him, but our age difference made it hard for us to enjoy doing the same things. I was in my bedroom, which was still on the first floor, and my brother was in the living room when the doorbell rang. My parents had only been gone for an hour, so I knew it wasn't them. I got up and went to the front door. My brother was standing up in the living room looking over at the door, and that's when I saw a man looking through the small side window on the porch. When he noticed me, he waved and pointed at the door as if to meet him there. I don't know if a lot of houses have these, but ours had 2 front doors. There was a main wooden door with a metal gate-like door in front of it. We always kept both locked. I opened the main door partially, but kept the gate door shut. I didn't know what to say, so I let him talk first. "Hi, buddy. Are your parents home?" he asked. No, not right now, sorry," I said, thinking he was trying to sell something. "Oh, thank you," he said, turning and walking away. I closed the door, and my brother asked who it was. I said it was just some random guy, then went back into my room. I really forgot about it and didn't think of it for a while. I made food for us a while later, then turned a show on for my brother, and went back to my room to play on my console. But then I heard the front door open. I got up, confused and a little frightened. But before I could make it down the hall and over to the door, I heard the metal door unlock and open. I saw my little brother standing in the doorway and that same man from earlier stepping inside our house. I didn't know what to do. The man greeted me again, but I didn't respond. I think I was in somewhat shock. I was just staring at him blankly. He faced my little brother and knelt down, starting to whisper something to him, and that's when I started moving over to my brother. The man then tried to put his arms around him, like he was trying to pick him up, but I quickly grabbed my brother's arm and pulled him back. The man eased off, putting his hands up like he wasn't doing anything. "Don't worry, buddy. I just want to show him something. You can come too if you want. It's right outside," he said with a friendly smile that was very creepy at the moment. I backed up, holding my clueless brother close to my side. "Please leave," I said, trying hard not to cry. He was still smiling, trying to act nice and caring. "I called the police already. Please just go." The man's whole attitude and face changed as soon as I said that. His smile went away and was replaced by anger and frustration. He took a step closer, and I yelled at the top of my lungs, screaming for help. The man backed up quickly and rushed out the front door, driving away in his truck. I called my parents right away, and they called the police for me. While we waited for everyone to show up, I yelled at my brother for letting the man in. He was crying and told me that the guy wanted to give him something. I knew my brother was too young to understand, but my emotions were taking over me, and I still yelled at him. The police made it first, and then my parents. They yelled at me for not watching over my brother. The man was seen on a neighbor's doorbell camera leaving our house and driving away, but it was too dark to get any identity from the video. We were all sure, though, that the man had been watching us for a while, trying to find the perfect time to kidnap us. He got really close, but thankfully after that day, I was about 13 or 14 and I was babysitting 2 boys for some church members. I had done this before and the kids loved me and the parents were very comfortable with me. This was a night where they were supposed to be gone the entire night. It's late as 2:30 in the morning. I was doing it for free that day because they were going to do something church-related, and that's just how I rolled back then. Anyway, the house they lived in was an apartment complex. You know, one of those small ones that had 2 floors and 4 doors on each level. They were on the bottom floor with 2 bedrooms on either side of the apartment, with the kitchen on the left and the living room on the right. and the sliding glass door to a small patio and a public bathroom next to the front door. It was about 1:30 a.m., and I knew they would be getting home soon. The kids were knocked out after me, practically begging them to call it a night in endless bedtime stories, and I had just finished my homework. They didn't have cable. This was before Netflix became an online service, so they had a couple of DVDs and VHS to watch. So I grabbed one of the Land Before Time movies to make the night go quicker. I was already very tired and I had nodded off a couple times. About 30 minutes went by and I could hear knocking on the front door. Knowing the parents had a key, I did nothing but sit there in the dark with the TV glowing. Being a paranoid person and who watches and reads enough horror, I grabbed the baseball bat that was next to the couch. What happened next will haunt me forever. I heard a small voice, a young woman's. "Oh dear, that won't help you." My heart stopped and I realized that the patio door didn't have the blind shut. My eyes shift slowly to the sliding door and I see someone on the patio staring in. I couldn't make anything out, other than that they were very short and wide. I screamed and ran into the kids' room. Thankfully, they were still asleep. Sadly, this was before I had a cell phone and there were no cordless landlines I could access. All I did was push the dresser in front of the door and I stared out of the only window in the room. That's when it became dark as a shadow loomed across the window. The knocking started again and the woman's voice called out, "Come on, dearie, I won't hurt you, please come out." The window was being knocked so hard that I was afraid it was going to break. The kids finally woke up and they were screaming and scared. I was a big girl and I could at the time lift my own weight, but knowing I had two kids with me, I became vulnerable and afraid. Not too long after this, I hear the father yell out, "Hey, who the hell are you?" And the person ran off. The front door opened shortly after and there was harsh knocking on the kids' bedroom door. Thankfully, it was the parents, and after I let them in and put the dresser back, I explained what happened, and they called the police. When they arrived, they obviously found nothing but the bushes that hide the patio were obviously cut up and ripped up to get through. I babysat for them once more after this, but they moved away about 5 months later, and I never babysat anyone ever again. And again to this day, I know the woman was long gone, but every time I hear a knock, a chill runs through me. When I turned 16, I had trouble deciding on what job to get. I really wasn't excited to work at the typical fast food or retail job, but at that age, there weren't many options. I had done babysitting before, but only for my parents' friends. My mom suggested I should try to do it as a part-time job for other people as well, and with no other appealing options, I took her advice. There was a local babysitting company in my town that helped both babysitters find work and parents find babysitters. I had an interview and they approved me to start working there, which was a big help because I didn't know enough people personally to make enough money. I worked there for 2 months, and the only downside was that I almost always babysit for a different family. Mostly, it was just parents going away for a special night or something, so they didn't have recurring work for me. I finally had one of the previous parents book another appointment with me. It was a single dad who took care of his daughter, Alyssa. All I remembered about him was that he didn't talk much. He had the next appointment scheduled from 6 to 10, so at 6 o'clock I pulled into his driveway and knocked on his door. He opened the door and gestured for me to come in. I stepped inside and Alyssa came from around the corner to say hi. Then the dad told me very specific, unusual instructions for the night. He said he would be back at exactly 10 p.m., but that I needed to leave a few minutes before that. I simply nodded and said, "Okay, no problem." But after he left, I thought about it more. It was a bizarre request, and I didn't know why he would be so strict about that. Over the time I babysat Alyssa, we did all the usual things. We played a few games, watched some of her favorite shows, and ate a small dinner. At one point, she took a quick nap on the couch, and I decided to walk around the house. Not to be creepy or anything, but just to make sure everything was normal. The dad left me with a bad feeling, so it made me feel better to see that the house was normal. But thinking about it more, I didn't feel comfortable leaving the house before he got home. It didn't feel right, and he made it out to be a little bit creepy, so come a few minutes before 10. I took Alyssa upstairs and got her ready for bed, then waited on the couch downstairs for the dad to come home. I knew he would probably give me a look or ask why I was still home, but I was sure that he would understand if I explained to myself. I kept track of the time on my phone, and at exactly 10, I watched out the window at the driveway for him to come home. A few minutes passed, and he still hadn't shown up. Then another 5 minutes, and he still hadn't come home. This was only strange because he had been so clear about being home at exactly 10, and even wanted me to leave early. I was glad I stayed at this point, because leaving Alyssa alone for more than a few minutes, like he said, would not have been safe. Once 20 minutes came and went, I tried to call him. The phone rang for a while, then he answered. "Hey, I just wanted to check in and make sure everything was okay." "I'm still here waiting for you to come home," I said. There was a long pause. "I told you to leave before 10. Please go home now." I didn't know how to respond, but then he added on, "I'm waiting for you to leave." I let out a shaky, "Okay," then hung up. Things were getting really creepy now, and I was not comfortable being in the house, but even less comfortable with leaving Alyssa alone in the house. I decided to call the police. I had no contact with the dad during the 10 minutes I waited for the police to come. But almost as soon as they arrived, the dad pulled into the driveway as well. I explained myself and everything strange that was going on, but the dad denied ever telling me to leave before he got home or that he was waiting for me to leave. He claimed he was just running late, and that over our phone call he told me that he'd be home in a few minutes, nothing else. He allowed them to look around, but nothing came up. Nothing else happened, and they had me go home. They told me that even if I did have proof of what he'd said, they really couldn't charge him with anything unless it was linked to something else. It aches my heart knowing that Alyssa is still alone with her dad, who is definitely up to something. Otherwise, why would he try so hard to hide it and lie about everything he told me? My best friend had a daughter, Sarah, that had just turned 7, and I would occasionally watch her whenever they needed. They lived in a really nice home in Washington, surrounded by trees and mountains. The nearest neighbors were a couple miles away, so I always enjoyed the peace and quiet while staying there. Anyways, my friend had asked me if I could watch Sarah for 2 days while she was going on a business trip. I agreed, and a few weeks later arrived at her house. We talked for a little bit and ate lunch together. Then she finished packing and headed out to catch her flight. I hung out with Sarah for a few hours, listening to her talk about school and her friends. Then I took her out to pick up some dinner and dessert. We got back to the house around 8 and agreed to watch a movie just before bed. I sat on the couch and began scrolling through a list of movies to find one. When I hear Sarah ask me, "Who's that?" I look where she's pointing at the front door and then hear someone knocking. With the house being so isolated, I never thought anyone would come up to the door. Nervously, I walked over and cracked the door open. There was a tall man standing on the porch. He looked a little surprised when I opened the door. "Can I help you?" I asked. He leaned to the left, looking through the crack in the door, then replied, "Sorry, just making sure someone was home." Then he turned away and started walking. Obviously, I found this very strange and a little bit creepy. I closed the door and locked it, then went to the back door and locked it as well. Sarah asked me who it was, and I told her it was just a neighbor, then went back to the couch and started a movie. We both enjoyed the movie, though it was a little bit longer than I had thought. I told Sarah it was time for bed and then followed her upstairs as she got ready. Once she was in bed, I came back down and sat on the couch. It was a little bit after 10 and I wasn't too tired yet, so I figured I'd turn something on the TV and just wind down for a bit before going to bed. As the TV played, I started to hear a crunching sound coming from somewhere. I muted the show and listened more carefully. It was coming from the back of the house. I went over to the back door and turned on the back porch light. Looking around, I couldn't see anything other than an empty porch with trees in the background. I stayed there listening for a few more minutes before eventually heading back to the couch. I wondered if my mind was just messing with me, as I was a little creeped out by being in a house surrounded by a forest in the dark. I always felt safe during the day and actually really enjoyed it. But as soon as the sun goes down, I turned up the volume again and decided to lay down as to get myself more sleepy. Apparently it worked too well and I fell asleep on the couch shortly after. A couple hours later, I woke up noticing the TV was still on. I turned it off and sat up, rubbing my eyes tiredly. But then I started to get an uneasy feeling again, as I noticed how silent it was in the house. There wasn't any sound at all. Then I began to hear that same crunching sound, but this time clearly sounding like footsteps. It was coming from the right side of the house, which was right by the room that I was in. A few seconds later, they stopped, seemingly right outside one of the windows that had the curtains down. Truly frightened, I walked over to the window slowly and quietly and pulled back the curtain. Nothing was there. I looked around and didn't see anything. I figured I had been imagining it and was just really tired. So I got a glass of water and headed upstairs to get to bed. The next morning, I made us some breakfast and we sat down together to talk about what we wanted to do today. But as we were discussing plans, Sarah asks me why I was walking around outside last night. I froze for a moment and asked her what she saw. She said she had heard someone walking around the house for almost an hour just after she had gone to bed. Chills ran down my body and I told her to stay inside while I went to look around outside. I grabbed a small knife just in case and went out the front door, walking around the house. It was hard to tell if anything was from last night or had already been there, but I didn't notice some scratches on the walls near some of the windows and doors. But other than that, everything seemed normal. I couldn't tell if there were any footprints as the yard was mostly thick grass. As I made my way back to the front door, I saw that same man from yesterday walking down the street in front of the house. He was just walking past, but again, this house was pretty far from anything else, so he had to have walked a couple miles at least just to get there. I went back inside and told Sarah that we were going to go to the mall today and walk around. I really didn't want to be in the house anymore, so I wanted to spend as much time away as possible. We stayed out for a while and didn't get back to the house until 6. My friend called me soon after just to check up on us. I mentioned the strange man that I had seen and described his features to her, and she actually said that she recognized the man from a few weeks ago. Apparently, he had come up to her house and asked if he could stay the night, to which she obviously declined. We agreed that if anything else happened, I wouldn't take any chances and would call the police. As the sun started to go down, I made sure to check all the doors one last time to make sure that they were locked. It was around 9 p.m., and Sarah and I were playing a quick board game before bed when we both started to hear a soft tapping noise coming from outside one. I stood up slowly and told Sarah to stay calm, but then a loud scratching came from outside the walls of the house right by the window in the room we were in. I grabbed Sarah and ran into the garage. We got in the car and I backed out of the driveway as quick as I could, making sure the garage fully shut before driving off. I couldn't see much in the darkness as we were leaving, but Sarah said that she saw someone running into the trees behind the house. I pulled into a hotel parking lot and called the police to report the incident, then called my friend to let them know what had happened. We were met 10 minutes later by 2 officers at the hotel, and they informed us that 2 more were at the house looking around. I told them everything and gave them a description of the man, and eventually they left. We ended up staying in a room at the hotel for the night. The next morning, my friend called and said her flight was just landing and she would be back in an hour, so we headed over to the house. We waited in the driveway for her to arrive, then we all went in together to make sure it was safe. I stayed for a few hours just to talk about everything, and then I said goodbye and went home. It was definitely one of the scariest things to ever happen to me, but fortunately the man was caught a month later after having been reported by multiple people for trying to break into their homes. What scares me the most about the guy was that he never said what his reasoning was for his actions. He had apparently broken into one of the homes, but he didn't steal anything at all. He just looked around for a little bit and then left empty-handed. It always makes me wonder what he was actually trying to do on the night he tried to break in.